All right, so so this session, we're going to be talking about key partnerships, marketing, strategic alliances, sort of just, broadly speaking, the sort of relationships that that an organization needs during its growth, and trying to think sort of more creatively about what these relationships can mean in light of pursuing our third wave values. So really delighted to have these two fantastic entrepreneurs here. I will let you describe your own experiences and paths, but I think what we'd love to hear from you to get us kicked off is some things about your journey generally, your product and solution approaches, as well as your leadership journey. Spend some time talking about that, but also talk about how the different kinds of partnerships have played through in your work and what you see of that going forward. Then we'll open up the discussion more broadly around these questions.
Okay. So Sage, founded Words Live, and my work stems out of my experience as a volunteer in high schools. I was in a PhD economics program at Howard, and they asked me to teach. And I taught freshmen for a year, and these were, the freshmen that literally made it to college. And what I began to notice was just there was so much deficiency in their writing and their essays. When I would ask them critical questions about reading, there was just comprehension issues, and I said, what's going on? And that this motivated me to go volunteer in the high schools to see kind of what the pipeline looked like. Because I didn't come from education. I wasn't a teacher initially. That teaching experience at Howard was my first time teaching in a classroom. But that's where the fire was lit for me. I just said this, what I saw it was abysmal. Behavioral problems, pandemonium, there was no real learning going on. And this was DC public schools. I came from DC public schools myself, so it just, it affected me. But I also had the benefit at this time of pursuing one of my hobbies, which is songwriting. And so I was hosting a real popular spot in DC called Busboys and Poets. If anyone's ever been there. I was one of their first open mic hosts, and at the same time that I was teaching. And so my brain naturally mapped to, songwriting as a solution space for reading and writing proficiency. And I just noticed that some of the same competencies that we wanted the students to master, the guest artists that would come through and the performing artists, they had that in spades. And so I just, my brain just began to map those two worlds. Created a taxonomy, and when I volunteered, I said, hey, can I take over your classroom? So teacher, can I take over your classroom this period? You're teaching a Civil War unit, and it's the Frederick Douglass narrative. I have about 10 great songs the kids know that have the same narrative structure. Let me try to teach narrative structure through these songs. And I just did that over time, kind of the repetition, developed the skill set there. I became known as the guy that could remix a curriculum. And I got some press for it. And then I had a chance encounter with Jim Shelton, who he was on the way out of Obama's administration. This was the second to last year of Obama's administration. And he said, I'm hearing what you're doing is good. He was in DC at the time. So I'm hearing what you're doing is great, but there's no way you're going to be able to scale yourself. Right? Again, this is before me thinking about technology, before me thinking about let's start a big ed tech thing. And I thought about that for a while, and I said, does the technology exist to kind of bottle up what we're doing and be able to expand it and give teachers and classrooms capacity to do it? And that's what set me out on this journey to ultimately develop a platform that could really open up lesson plan creation for teachers and enable kids to put more choice, more voice, more of their self-selecting preference into their learning. And that's kind of how I started. But what I did, being an outsider of education, I didn't really have any cachet in the industry. And so I began to look at these partnerships through accelerators and incubators as a way of increasing my cachet and then ultimately building capacity for what I was trying to do. And that's ultimately my journey. I became what some people call a serial fellow. I think the last count was 9 fellowships.
Wow. That's nice.
The ones you're familiar with: 4.0 Schools, Camelback, AT&T Aspire, Village Capital, Run Again. I started actually at the High Lab, at the Harvard Innovation Lab. And that's where I got my first set of engineers. And this is sort of, I'll just go through them real quick. There's sort of 4 points that kind of drove me to continue to pursue those programs. And one was I needed organizational capacity, right? As an outsider, as a non-tech fellow, which I think we can probably need to highlight in this room as well. If you have an ed tech solution, but you're not a technical founder, that represents additional capacity constraints, that represents some additional hurdles. And I encountered something that I think is another good thought to highlight, which is, does ed tech attract the best tech talent, right? If you're a hot shot engineer coming out of MIT, does the education space, is that attractive for you? And I think that has some ramifications to our capacity. It's just something I want to throw out there and help us think through. It provided industry legitimacy, learning opportunities, and then marketing surrogates. And I'll kind of talk to that a little bit later, but that was kind of my approach.